Let's talk about oil prices. It's the beginning of the Ukrainian-Russian war. Hopefully it's near the end, but I doubt that's going to be the case. And the U.S. has decided to put an embargo on, specifically the Biden administration, on Russian oil. On the whole, this is a good thing because economic retaliation for tyranny is probably the single best way to do it if you can make it stick. And in this case, it seems that our allies are following through with it to some extent, which means that some of Russia's biggest markets are going to be close to their oil. This is very good. However, it will likely cause oil prices, which are already high, though by no means at a historic high, to increase further, and may actually approach the historic highs of the 70s when adjusted for inflation. Why is this? Well, to start with, oil prices before we started this whole thing, or rather Putin started this whole thing, were very high. Why were they high? Some people blame Biden. Is this accurate? We'll see. One thing, though, that we need to get out of the way is that I'm Joseph Cadott. This is Ill-Informed Opinions. I'm an author and editor. You can find my works online at any major bookstore, although you may have to order them, and feel free to buy them. If you have any questions or comments after watching this or during watching this, please feel free to share them. If you have any ideas for topics you would like me to cover, please feel free to share that. Okay, with that business out of the way, let's go into the first thing you have to understand when discussing oil prices. First, oil is fundamentally, on a very important level, fungible. While different grades of crude and so on come out of the ground and it's found in different places and so on, ultimately, when it's refined, gasoline is gasoline. It's chemically identical in almost every important way. I mean, there are traces of things which don't affect your car. Kerosene's kerosene, plastics are the plastics they are, and so on. I mean, tar is tar. So, despite trace differences, by the time it's finished being refined, oil is oil. Why is this important? Okay, so oil that's produced in Venezuela, which is apparently some of the worst, is not suited for being refined almost anywhere except for the United States, which, by the way, is how you know the United States didn't care about Venezuela, because if we actually wanted to change Venezuela's government, we could have just stopped refining it and switched our refineries to going after other oil, which is easier to refine and less costly. But we didn't, so if we had done that, the Chavez regime and then the Maduro regime, the entire Bolivarian socialist revolution would not have lasted 5 minutes. So, that said, let's go to Saudi Arabia. They produce apparently some really nice crude, which is very easy to refine. Now, this makes a difference at the beginning stages, but once it gets to where it gets distributed globally, there's not much there to make a difference. You can't go up to a fuel pump, and I'm sure you know this, having never been able to do it, and say, I would like some Saudi Arabian, I would like some British North Sea oil, I'd like some Scandinavian oil, or I'd like some sweet Texas crude, or something like this. No, you don't do that. You just pay at the pump. Fuel oil comes into your house, if that's how you eat your house, which you shouldn't do that way. But I understand in the Northeast that's pretty much the best way to do it, or best current way to do it. So, oil is fungible. This means that when the price of oil goes up sufficiently in one area, the price of oil goes up everywhere. Now, in the lead up to the Ukrainian invasion, everybody saw the writing on the wall, and even though there were a bunch of people, including our own government, who tried to pretend that Putin wasn't going to do this, anybody who knew anything about Putin and was willing to tell themselves the truth knew that Putin was going to invade the Ukraine. He was pretty much no reason not to. The U.S. and other countries had done nothing when he invaded Chechnya, when he invaded Georgia, or when he invaded the Ukraine the first time, which, by the way, we were sending aid and comfort to the Ukrainians to help them with that. And once Biden got in office, and if you forget, Trump did his level best to assist Putin by blocking military and humanitarian aid to the Ukraine. So that's, a whole thing. So people knew this was happening, so people were afraid. So the price of oil started climbing because Russia is, depending on how you measure it, 1, 2, or 3 in terms of oil production in the world. The other two are the United States and Saudi Arabia. It depends on how you measure it, but all three are up there, and they produce ridiculous amounts of oil. So if you block Russia's export of oil, or at least you take away some of its markets, the price of everybody else has to fill in that gap, which means the price of oil overall has to increase. But what does this mean for us? Well, it means that even though the U.S. only gets 300,000 of its 17 million barrels a day in Russian oil currently, although technically we should be getting zero soon, the price is going to increase rapidly because Russia produces, again, depending on how you measure it, roughly 10 million barrels a day. So that's a huge chunk of the global oil supply. Cutting that out, or even the fear of cutting it out, which is one of the reasons why we got to where we are, can have a huge impact on basically everybody. Okay? Oil is what's called fungible. There's no difference between oil A and oil B. I mean, yes, there is, but when it comes down to the consumer side of things, it's fungible. It's like gold. Gold is, at a certain purity, is the same as gold at the same purity. Okay? It's no matter where it's sourced. Okay? Silver, most precious metals, large amounts of things, depending upon where it's sourced, has nothing to do with anything except for the logistics of getting point A to point B. If I got wheat and it goes into flour, that flour is going to be the same as flour from the same species that's been ground into flour in the same way as far as bakers are concerned. In other words, fungible. Okay? It's very important you understand the fungibility issue. Not just if you're here, but in general. Every dollar is a dollar. The dollars are fungible. So it's also a tautology. So now, there's a good supply reason why the price is going up. It has been going up because of the fear and now the reality of Russian oil being restricted, which restricts the overall supply, which means that people can expect higher costs as long as they don't limit demand. What are other factors? Well, another factor is there's a seasonal change which occurs when refineries and other facilities switch from winter processing to summer processing and vice versa. So that always causes a spike because while they're in this process, there's less capacity, which means that while the amount of oil coming in may be the same, the amount of oil going out is lower. So again, less supply, more demand, more or same demand, prices go up. This is a seasonal thing we know about. So, what's another thing that we have to worry about? Well, you have things like, say, the reduction of use in oil in terms of like vehicles and so on has had a net impact. So people are producing less, so as they don't have less waste, which means that the supply is smaller. As people switch to nuclear and other means of energy production, same thing. companies aren't going to produce as much because of that. But now all of a sudden there's a big demand for more oil since the supply is limited, and they have to ramp up production. This is also expensive. There's also a cost. There's 100 other things that come together. Not one of these has I mentioned Biden, or for that matter Trump, or Obama, or any number of other things. Now people blame Biden for canceling Keystone Pipeline. Well, first off, the Keystone Pipeline was to get oil from Canada to Mexico, and from Mexico to the rest of the world. Canada is our biggest oil partner in terms of where we get our imports from. So we're already getting a bunch of oil from Canada. Canada has a bunch more they want to sell, so they go through Mexico, itself an oil-producing country, and ship out. That's what the Keystone XL pipeline is for, or was for. And it has been defunct since around the time of the late Bush administration, maybe a little later. But basically, it was a non-issue, and has been for more than a decade. Okay? Blocking the Keystone XL pipeline was something that the industry didn't care about because the industry itself had abandoned the project. All right? Trump allowed them to go through. They didn't move forward. So Biden's backing the people who actually cared about the environment and so on, and blocked the Keystone pipeline. Well, it was a nice thing for him to do, and it signaled something or other, but it really didn't affect anything, any more than Trump allowing it to go through affected anything. No one's using it, no one wants to use it, so it ain't happening. Now, what is happening is this Ukrainian war blocks a pipeline that was supposed to go into the Black Sea from Russia. Source of oil has to go a different route, harder to get there, means it's more expensive, means the price is driving up on this fungible asset, which means everything goes up. So, what we end up with, and one more thing about the Keystone XL pipeline, even if it had been finished exactly as had been planned, that would not have affected the American oil supply in any way other than that the way adding more supply in general to the system would have. If they had sent the oil down the St. Lawrence River all the way seaway down to out through New York State, it would have been the same as far as the global supply as having the Keystone pipeline. It doesn't make any difference from the global supply standpoint as to how the oil gets out of Canada, and it sure as hell didn't make any difference to our domestic supplies, because that oil wasn't getting to the U.S. ever, except once it got processed somewhere else and then shipped back, yada yada. So that's why Biden's not to blame for this, and why Trump, while he's to blame for a whole hell of a lot of the things regarding this, is not to blame for the oil prices either. So another thing that may have had a minor effect was blocking of imports from Canada, again our biggest oil partner, by a bunch of idiots who had their feelies hurt because they had to wear masks and care about other people for once, and so they staged a big trucker protest which dissolved as soon as it got to the US, because Canadians are assholes too. Always remember that. They're just polite about it. So this whole mess, it means that there's a whole host of factors which have diminished supply relative to the demand. And what is this, which of course is economics 101, supply is gone relative to demand, prices go up, especially for a relatively inflexible demand that you have with oil. So what does this mean for the long run? And before I tell you, again, I want to remind you, please feel free to send comments and the like. I'd always like to hear from you, and feel free to share. So, what does this mean for the long run? It's actually kind of positive, because every time oil gets near this price, adjusted for inflation, we reinvest in greener technology, something which we absolutely need to do. We need to be moving over to a nuclear power-based system supplemented by wind and solar, and if possible, solar and wind as a primary source, but that's very difficult in most places. But yeah, the cost of oil going up drives investment in us getting greener and producing less greenhouse gas, and ultimately prices for energy dropping. The more mix that you have for your energy supply, just like with anything else, the better off things are for you, because there's not one thing that you can take out. There's not one dependency you have. There's multiple, and it's all over the place, which is much harder to deal with if you're looking to shut it down or you're looking to impact it. However, this also has if the prices don't stay up, this might have a also positive effect in that everybody knows this effect of the increased oil prices on green energy development. So if the prices go too high, there's incentive to pump out more oil. We will see a lag before prices go down. If there's less demand on oil, i.e. because of green energy development, or people buying hybrid cars instead of gas guzzlers, why, we will see the oil prices go down. The big problem is that for the short while where this is going to be problematic, this will affect people at the lower economic end of the spectrum much more dramatically than they will affect those who are in the middle and upper. And that's because the price of oil significantly impacts logistics and transportation, how things get from point A to point B. If I'm buying something expensive, like a car or a computer or a tablet or even an Xbox Series X, which I have yet to find, by the way, because of the damn crypto bros poaching all the GPUs, then the price of transportation is relatively small per unit. If we're talking about something like food, price of transportation, since the prices are so small with regards to food, especially in the US, where our food prices are astonishingly low because we produce more of it than anybody else, at least for broader consumption, then we'll see a big impact, because a small shift in a small price equals a big shift in someone's overall budget, especially if food is one of their primary things that they're dealing with in terms of purchasing. It won't change your mortgage, but if you're struggling to make ends meet as it stands, this isn't going to help. So all that said, there's some good news, there's some bad news. It's not Biden's fault. It's not any one person's fault besides Putin and a bunch of other people who are making similar decisions. So I hope that you get that as a takeaway. You can't blame any one person for this, except for Putin. And screw him, and hopefully more sanctions go in place and the war ends in a favorable manner. I hope to hear from you guys soon. Talk to you later.